The wind blew cold that evening, carrying bits of paper and dust along the narrow street. The city lights flickered to life one by one as the sun slowly disappeared behind tall buildings. People hurried by with bags in their hands, talking on phones, laughing, rushing home after a long day. In the middle of that busy street, an old man stood by a corner clutching a small wooden board that had only a few words written in faded paint. "Can I play for food?" He didn't shout. He didn't ask anyone for money. He just stood there, quiet, waiting. His name was Henry Collins. He was thin, the kind of thin that told you life had not been easy for a long time. His gray hair peeked out from under an old hat, and his coat, though once expensive, was now worn and patched at the elbows. His shoes were cracked but clean. He had a proud way of standing, as if he refused to let the world see how tired he was. Henry had been standing on that same corner for weeks. Each day he would set up a small stool near an old upright piano that someone had thrown out months ago. The piano's wood was chipped, and some keys didn't work anymore, but Henry treated it as if it were gold. Every morning, before anyone came by, he would dust it off, gently pressing each key to see which one still played. He would hum softly, warming his fingers even in the freezing cold. Then, when the streets began to fill, he would start to play. At first, people didn't notice him. They were too busy, their minds full of work and screens and plans. A few glanced his way, maybe for a second, but no one stopped. Once in a while, a child would tug at their parent's sleeve and say, "Look, he's playing a piano." But the parent would just pull them along, too rushed to care. Henry never complained. He would simply smile to himself, close his eyes, and keep playing. Music had been his life once. Many years ago, he taught piano at a small music school not far from there. He had students who loved him, concerts where he played proudly, and a wife who always sat in the front row smiling. Her name was Grace. She was his world. Together, they had lived in a small apartment filled with music and laughter. But time had a way of taking things one by one. When Grace became sick, Henry spent everything he had to care for her. He sold their piano, then their furniture, then finally their home. She passed away one winter morning, holding his hand, telling him not to cry. After that, life became quieter. The school closed, and the world moved on without him. Now at 72, Henry had only his music left. That evening, the air felt colder than usual. Henry rubbed his hands together and looked at the few coins inside his small tin cup. It wasn't much, barely enough for a sandwich. He took a deep breath and began to play again. This time it was a soft tune, something slow and gentle, the kind of melody that could make even a stranger stop for a moment and remember something warm. A young woman passing by slowed her steps. She didn't recognize the song, but something about it made her pause. She stood for a while listening. When Henry finished, she dropped a few coins in his cup and said softly, "That was beautiful." Henry smiled, nodded, and whispered, "Thank you." It was small moments like that that kept him going. Across the street, lights glowed from a fancy restaurant where people sat laughing and eating. The sound of glasses clinking mixed with the soft hum of conversation. Henry could smell the food from where he stood, the buttery aroma of baked bread, the spice of roasted meat. His stomach growled quietly, but he tried to ignore it. He had learned long ago that hunger was easier to handle than loneliness. He kept playing until his fingers started to hurt. The old piano keys were cold, and sometimes he had to stop just to warm his hands. He didn't mind. Each note reminded him that he was still alive, still capable of creating something beautiful even when life seemed to have forgotten him. A little boy, maybe 7 or 8 years old, stopped in front of him. His mother stood nearby waiting. The boy stared at Henry's fingers. "Why are you playing outside?" the boy asked. Henry looked up, smiled, and said gently, "Because music keeps me warm, son." The boy thought about that for a second, then nodded as if he understood. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a candy bar, and placed it on the stool next to Henry. "For you," he said before running back to his mother. Henry looked at the candy bar for a moment, and his eyes filled with tears. He quickly blinked away. He didn't want to cry in front of strangers. Instead, he smiled again, quietly whispering, "Thank you, young man." The night grew darker and most people had gone home. Only a few cars passed by now. The sound of the piano echoed through the empty street, soft and pure. Henry played one last tune before deciding to pack up for the night. He covered the piano with an old cloth to protect it from the dew, then sat down on his stool for a moment. watching the lights from the restaurant across the street. Inside that restaurant, everything was bright and alive. The laughter was loud, the music was upbeat, and the smell of expensive wine filled the air. The people inside didn't notice the old man outside their window. They didn't see the quiet figure sitting alone, his breath visible in the cold night. But one person did. A man in a tailored suit sitting at the corner table near the window happened to glance outside. He saw Henry and frowned slightly, then chuckled. He was surrounded by friends talking about business deals and vacations. He raised his glass and said something that made everyone at his table laugh. For a moment, Henry looked up and saw them laughing. He didn't know what they were laughing about, but he smiled anyway and gave a small nod toward the window. He didn't know it yet, but that simple moment, a glance, a laugh, a song was about to change his life. As he stood up to leave, Henry thought about how tomorrow would be another day, another chance to play. He never knew who might stop to listen or who might need his music the most. He gathered his things carefully, folding the small sign that read, "Can I play for food?" and slipping it into his bag. Before walking away, he pressed one last note on the piano. The sound rang out softly, fading into the cool night air like a whisper from another time. He smiled to himself. "Good night, Grace," he said quietly, as if speaking to someone only he could see. Then he turned and slowly walked down the empty street, the sound of his footsteps blending with the wind. Behind him, in the warm glow of the restaurant, the man in the suit watched him leave. Something about that old man's calmness, that quiet dignity, stuck in his mind even as his friends kept laughing. He shook his head and turned back to his meal, but deep down, something in him had shifted just a little. Henry disappeared around the corner, unaware that his story was only beginning. Tomorrow he would be back at that same spot. Tomorrow he would play again. And tomorrow, when the man in the restaurant laughed once more, he would have no idea that he was about to meet someone who would change the way he saw the world. The next evening came with a soft drizzle that painted the streets with little silver reflections. People hurried by with umbrellas and cars splashed through puddles as their headlights cut through the misty air. The city didn't slow down for rain, it never did. But for Henry, the rain meant the piano keys would be slippery, and fewer people would stop to listen. Still he came, as he always did. He walked carefully, his old shoes soaking a little with each step, his coat pulled tight against the wind. The piano stood where he had left it, covered with a tarp to protect it from the weather. He wiped the surface gently, removed the cover, and sat down. The first few keys stuck slightly, damp from the humidity. He pressed them again until the notes came through clear and clean. Then he began to play, quietly at first as the city hummed around him. Across the street, the same fancy restaurant glowed with golden light. Inside, waiters carried plates that smelled of butter and roasted herbs. The guests were dressed in fine clothes, laughing, clinking glasses, and talking about things that sounded important. At one of the tables near the window sat Ethan Ward. He was in his early 40s. Sharp suit, expensive watch, and a voice that carried even when he didn't mean it to. He wasn't a bad man, but he had long forgotten what it felt like to struggle. Everything he wanted came easily now, money, cars, even people. Success had turned into a game, and he was winning. Tonight he was celebrating another business deal with a few friends. They joked loudly, and the waiter poured wine that cost more than Henry's entire month of meals. When the laughter died down for a moment, one of Ethan's friends glanced toward the window and said, "Hey, there's that old man again. The one who plays piano outside. He's here every night." Ethan looked out, his expression curious. "That one?" he said, pointing his fork slightly toward the window. "The one in the old coat?" His friend nodded. "Yeah, he just sits there playing. I heard someone say he only asks for food." Ethan leaned back in his chair, smiling faintly. "Plays for food? That's new. Guess that's one way to earn dinner." The table laughed. They watched for a moment as Henry played, completely unaware of the attention. His fingers moved slowly, gracefully, like someone who didn't just play the notes but felt them. The sound was soft and emotional, rising and falling with the rhythm of rain. One of the women at the table sighed. "It's kind of beautiful, though," she said quietly. Ethan chuckled. "Beautiful? Maybe. But come on, he's sitting out there in the cold playing for food. You call that beautiful?" The woman frowned slightly. "Maybe he just loves music." Ethan grinned. "Or maybe he loves the attention." You never know these days. Some people act sad just to make others feel guilty enough to help them. Everyone laughed again, but something in Ethan's voice sounded hollow even to himself. He glanced outside once more, watching the old man's hands. Despite the wrinkles and the cold, those hands moved like they belonged to someone much younger. Every note was steady and sure. "Tell you what," Ethan said suddenly, leaning forward. "Let's have a little fun. I'll invite him in here. He says he plays for food, right? I'll give him a real chance." His friends exchanged looks, half surprised, half amused. "What are you going to do?" one of them asked. Ethan smirked. "I'll tell him to play something in here. If he impresses me, I'll buy him dinner. If not, well, at least he gets to be warm for a few minutes." The table laughed again, though one or two people looked uncomfortable. Still, no one stopped him. Ethan raised his hand to call a waiter. "Go get that old man outside," he said. "Tell him Mr. Ward wants to hear him play inside, for real." The waiter hesitated. "Sir, are you sure?" Ethan nodded. "Yes, I'm sure. Let's see what he's got." The waiter hurried out into the rain and crossed the street. Henry stopped playing when he saw the man approaching. "Sir," the waiter said, trying to be polite, "my boss from across the street, he'd like to invite you inside to play. He said if you're good, he'll buy you dinner." Henry looked surprised. He wasn't used to being noticed, let alone invited anywhere. "Inside?" he asked softly. "Yes, sir." "Just for a few minutes." Henry thought for a moment, then nodded. He covered the piano again, straightened his coat, and followed the waiter across the street. When he stepped into the restaurant, warmth wrapped around him like a blanket. The smell of food made his empty stomach twist, but he didn't show it. He stood there quietly, unsure what to do next. People turned to look, curious. His old coat and tired face didn't belong in a place like this. Ethan smiled from his table. "There he is," he said loudly. "Come on over, my friend. Let's hear what you've got." Henry nodded politely and walked to the piano in the corner of the room. It was a grand piano, polished so well that the lights reflected off its surface. He hadn't touched such an instrument in years. For a moment he just stared at it, his eyes softening. Ethan leaned back, arms crossed, watching closely. "Go on, old man. Play something nice for us. If you impress me, dinner's on me." A few guests laughed quietly. The waiter stood nearby, unsure how to react. Henry didn't say anything. He simply removed his gloves, revealing thin, trembling fingers. Then he sat down. At first there was silence. Everyone waited, some with amused smiles, others with curiosity. Then Henry began to play. The first notes were gentle, barely above a whisper, but there was something in them that immediately caught everyone's attention. The laughter faded. The chatter stopped. The melody grew stronger, flowing through the air like a story without words. Each note told something: the ache of loss, the warmth of love, the years of dreams now gone. The sound filled the restaurant, reaching even those sitting in the back. Some people closed their eyes. Others simply stared, unable to look away. Ethan's smirk slowly disappeared. He had expected clumsy playing, or maybe an old tune played badly, but this was something else. The old man's hands moved with grace and certainty, as if every key was a part of his soul. By the time Henry finished, no one moved. The last note lingered in the air like a memory. Then slowly the room filled with applause. Real, heartfelt applause. Henry bowed his head slightly, smiling softly. "Thank you," he said quietly. Ethan stood up, still staring at him. "Where did you learn to play like that?" he asked, his voice lower now, almost respectful. Henry looked at him and replied simply, "I used to teach. Music was my life once." For a moment, Ethan didn't know what to say. His friends were silent too. It was as if the room had shifted. Something invisible had changed in the air. Finally, Ethan cleared his throat. "Waiter," he said, "get this man whatever he wants for dinner. And bring him a drink." Henry smiled, though his eyes looked far away. "Thank you, sir. Just some soup would be fine." Ethan frowned slightly. "Just soup? You can order anything." Henry nodded. "Yes, but soup will do." The waiter hurried off to bring the meal. Henry sat at the piano again, gently touching the keys. "It's been a long time since I've played one like this," he said softly. Ethan pulled out a chair and sat nearby. "You really are good," he admitted. "Better than most pianists I've heard, and I've been to a few concerts." Henry chuckled quietly. "Music doesn't leave you even when everything else does." Ethan looked at him, confused but intrigued. "Everything else?" Henry didn't answer right away. He just smiled again, eyes glistening under the soft restaurant light. Just a long story, sir, but music keeps me alive. The soup arrived, steaming and rich with the smell of vegetables and herbs. Henry ate slowly, savoring every spoonful as if it were the best meal in the world. Ethan watched him, the laughter from earlier gone. Something about the old man's calmness unsettled him. He had spent years chasing success, trying to buy happiness, but this man, sitting in a worn coat, eating soup, seemed more at peace than he had ever been. Ethan didn't say much after that. He paid the bill quietly and left a generous tip for the waiter. Before he left, he turned to Henry and said, "Come back tomorrow. Play again. Dinner will be waiting." Henry looked up, surprised. "You want me to play here?" Ethan nodded. "Yes, I think this place could use a bit of real music." Henry smiled softly. "Thank you, sir." As Ethan walked out into the night, the rain had stopped. The air smelled fresh and the sound of the city had softened somehow. He didn't know why, but he felt lighter. For the first time in a long time, he wasn't thinking about money or deals. He was thinking about that music and the old man who played it as if it were life itself. The next day, the city woke up to a bright morning. The air was clear after last night's rain, and sunlight sparkled on the wet pavement. People were in better moods. Shops opened, cars honked less, and the sky looked bluer than usual. For Henry, it was just another day to play his music. But this time, he carried something different in his heart. The night before, he had eaten a full meal for the first time in weeks, and not just because someone took pity on him. It was because someone had truly listened. He arrived early, as he always did, and uncovered the old street piano. He wiped it gently, his fingers brushing across the chipped wood. He smiled faintly, whispering to himself, "Let's make some music, old friend." He started with a soft tune, one of those melodies that fill the morning air with warmth. People walking to work smiled as they passed. Some even stopped for a moment. The street, usually noisy and impatient, felt a little more alive that morning. Across the street, inside the restaurant, the manager noticed him and called the kitchen. "Hey," he said, "that old man from last night is playing again. Mr. Ward said if he came back to let him in." A waiter went out and waved at Henry. "Sir, Mr. Ward wants you to come inside again. The piano's ready for you." Henry looked surprised but nodded. He carefully covered the old street piano, picked up his bag, and crossed the street. Inside, the warm light greeted him again. The smell of coffee and fresh bread filled the air. The restaurant was quieter in the morning. Only a few guests sat at tables reading newspapers or having breakfast. The grand piano from the night before stood by the window, shining in the sunlight. Henry ran his hand over the smooth surface. "Beautiful," he murmured softly. The waiter smiled. "Mr. Ward said you can play whenever you like. He'll be in later today," Henry nodded. "Thank you, son." He sat down, took a deep breath, and began to play. This time, he didn't play for food. He played because he wanted to fill the empty air with something meaningful. His fingers danced across the keys with gentle strength. The notes flowed like sunlight through water, bright, calm, and full of life. A few customers looked up from their tables. One man closed his newspaper and just listened. A woman smiled quietly, tapping her fingers to the rhythm. Even the waiters slowed their steps, moving carefully so they wouldn't disturb the melody. For the first time in years, Henry felt like he was home. As he played, he remembered moments from long ago, his wife sitting in the front row, smiling proudly during one of his performances, the applause of students after a recital, the small music school where he used to teach. He remembered laughter, friendship, purpose. All the things that had slowly faded with time came alive again through the music. He didn't notice when Ethan entered. Ethan had come in quietly that morning, wearing a simple jacket instead of a suit. He stood by the door watching the old man play. Something about the scene, this frail-looking man creating such deep, beautiful sound, made Ethan feel something he hadn't felt in years: humility. He waited until the song ended before walking closer. "That was incredible," he said softly. Henry looked up and smiled. "Ah, good morning, sir. I didn't see you there." Ethan pulled out a chair and sat near him. "You really do play from the heart, don't you?" Henry chuckled. "I suppose it's the only way I know how." Ethan leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "I've been thinking about you since last night," he admitted. You know, I've met a lot of people, musicians, artists, business folks, but I've never seen anyone play like that. You could be on a big stage somewhere. Henry smiled gently. I used to be. A long time ago. Really? Ethan asked. Henry nodded slowly. Yes, I taught music for many years. I even had students who became great performers. But time changes things. My wife got sick, and after she passed, I lost everything else too. I suppose music is all I have left now. Ethan sat quietly, unsure what to say. The words "lost everything" echoed in his head. He thought about his own life, how he had everything money could buy, yet somehow he still felt empty inside. I'm sorry, Ethan said finally. That must have been hard. Henry gave a small smile. It was, but life goes on. And when you have music, you're never truly alone. The restaurant was still quiet except for the sound of the piano. The sunlight touched the keys like gold, and for a moment it felt as if the whole world outside had stopped to listen. Ethan leaned back, lost in thought. For years he had measured success in numbers, profits, deals, accounts. But looking at Henry, he saw something he couldn't buy. Peace. After a while, Ethan said, You know, I think people would love to hear you play here regularly. Maybe every evening. I could make it official, pay you properly, give you a schedule. What do you think? Henry looked at him with wide eyes. You do that for me? Ethan smiled. Of course. You've got a gift. It deserves to be heard. Henry hesitated. I don't want to be a burden, sir. I'm just an old man who loves the piano. Ethan shook his head. You'd never be a burden. You'd be the reason people come here. Henry didn't know what to say. For years, people had walked past him as if he didn't exist. Now suddenly someone saw him again. Not as a beggar, but as a musician, a man with worth. His eyes filled with tears he tried to hide. I'd be honored, he said softly. Ethan smiled. Then it settled. You'll start this weekend. I'll have the staff set everything up. Henry nodded, still a little dazed. Thank you, sir, truly. Just Ethan, he said. No, sir. Henry laughed gently. All right, Ethan. For the rest of the morning, Henry played while Ethan listened. Customers came and went, many leaving tips near the piano. Some even thanked Henry personally. The room that had once been filled with noise and chatter now held a kind of quiet respect. When lunchtime came, Ethan invited Henry to sit with him. They shared a simple meal, soup and bread. Henry ate slowly, savoring every bite. You know, Ethan said, stirring his coffee, when I saw you outside the other night, I thought you were just another old man trying to get attention. I even laughed. Henry smiled softly. I saw that. Ethan looked embarrassed. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have done that. You didn't deserve it, Henry shook his head. Don't worry. People laugh when they don't understand. I've learned not to take it personally. Ethan looked at him for a long moment, then said quietly, You're a better man than most. Henry chuckled. I'm just a man who loves what he does. That's all. After lunch, Ethan had to leave for a meeting, but before he went, he handed Henry a small envelope. Just a little advance for your first few days, he said. And if you ever need anything, clothes, food, whatever, just tell me. Henry opened the envelope and saw more money than he'd held in years. He looked up quickly. Ethan, this is too much, Ethan smiled. It's not enough for what you gave me last night. You reminded me what real value looks like. Henry stood, shaking his hand firmly. Thank you, Ethan. I won't forget your kindness. As Ethan left, he turned once more to see Henry sitting back at the piano, fingers already moving across the keys. The soft notes followed him out the door and down the street. Later that evening, when the restaurant filled again, Henry played as the diners listened. The waiters noticed how quiet it became whenever he performed, how even the loudest group seemed to fall silent, drawn in by the music. One older woman approached him between songs and said, That piece you played just now, what was it called? Henry smiled gently. It doesn't have a name. It's something I wrote years ago for my wife. The woman's eyes softened. It's beautiful. You can feel the love in every note. Henry bowed his head slightly. Thank you, ma'am. She was my reason for every song I ever wrote. When the night ended and the lights dimmed, Henry sat alone for a few minutes at the piano. He ran his hands over the keys, whispering, We did good today, Grace. Outside, the city lights shimmered like stars. For the first time in years, Henry didn't feel invisible. He didn't know that across town. Ethan sat in his office staring at his reflection in the dark glass window, thinking about everything Henry had said. For the first time in a long while, his mind wasn't on money or success. It was on music, kindness, and the strange peace he felt when that old man played. He didn't know it yet, but Henry's music had already begun to change him. The following weekend arrived quietly. The restaurant was busier than ever, but this time people weren't just coming for the food. They were coming for the man at the piano. Henry had become something of a local secret. Word had spread quickly about the old man who played like the notes were alive, who poured his whole soul into every song. Some guests said they'd never heard anything like it, that his music made them remember things they had long forgotten. Ethan arrived early that evening, dressed simply again. He had been looking forward to this moment all week. The stress from his business meetings hadn't gone away, but there was a calmness inside him now, something new. He had started listening to piano music in his car and even found himself tapping his fingers on the steering wheel to imaginary melodies. When he stepped inside, he saw Henry already seated at the grand piano, adjusting his stool and warming his hands. The old man looked healthy, more alive. His eyes carried a light that had been missing before. "Good evening," Ethan said, walking over. Henry smiled. "Ah, Ethan, you're here early." "I didn't want to miss the opening notes," Ethan replied, pulling out a chair nearby. Henry chuckled softly. "You remind me of one of my old students. He used to arrive before I even unlocked the classroom." Ethan grinned. "Was he any good?" "Oh, he became a wonderful musician. Not famous, but happy. And that's all that matters in the end." Ethan nodded, quietly thinking about how rarely he felt truly happy, even with everything he owned. As the evening crowd began to fill the restaurant, Henry started to play. The first tune was light and hopeful, almost playful. The chatter of guests faded as the melody filled the room. The waiters moved more slowly, as if even they didn't want to disturb the sound. Ethan sat there watching, feeling the music sink into him. It wasn't just pleasant, it was healing. He didn't know why, but every time Henry played, he felt something shift inside. After a while, Henry paused to rest his fingers. Ethan took the chance to ask him something that had been on his mind. "Henry," he began softly, "you told me you used to teach. What made you stop?" Henry sighed gently, leaning back on the bench. "Life," he said. "Sometimes it doesn't go the way you plan." He looked out the window for a moment before continuing. "My wife and I built our lives around music. She was my biggest fan, my greatest support, but when she got sick, everything else stopped mattering. I sold my instruments, my books, even the little house we shared. When she passed, I didn't see a reason to play anymore." Ethan listened quietly. There was a lump in his throat he couldn't quite swallow. "But," Henry continued softly, "one night I walked past an old piano someone had left on the street. It was broken, out of tune, but when I pressed one key, it sang back to me. It was as if she was saying, 'Play again.' So I did. Every day since then I've played, whether anyone listened or not." For a few moments, Ethan couldn't speak. There was nothing to say. He just nodded slowly, understanding more than he wanted to admit. "You know," Henry added with a gentle smile, "sometimes music finds the broken hearts first. It knows where to go." Ethan looked down, his hands resting on the table. "Maybe that's why it found me," he said quietly. Henry smiled again, not saying a word, just nodding as if he understood exactly what Ethan meant. When the dinner rush began, the restaurant filled completely. People leaned toward the piano, drawn in by the sound. Even the kitchen staff peeked out to listen when they could. There was something about Henry's playing that made everyone softer, kinder. After his third song, Henry noticed a family sitting near the front, a mother, father, and little girl who couldn't have been more than 7. The girl was staring at him, wide-eyed, completely captivated. Between songs, she walked up shyly and asked, "Can you play something happy?" Henry smiled warmly. "Of course, little one. This one's for you." He began a cheerful tune that made the girl giggle and clap her hands. Soon the whole restaurant was smiling. When he finished, the little girl gave a small bow and returned to her seat, grinning ear to ear. Ethan laughed softly. "You've got fans of all ages." Henry shrugged modestly. "Music belongs to everyone. Young, old, it doesn't matter." As the night went on, Ethan noticed something he hadn't seen before. People were leaving larger tips than usual. But they weren't just leaving money. Some left small notes, handwritten messages of gratitude. "Your music made me cry in a good way," one said. Another read, "Thank you for reminding me of my mother." Ethan picked one up and read it aloud. You're changing lives here, Henry. Henry smiled humbly. Maybe they're just remembering who they are. After the last song of the evening, the restaurant erupted in applause. Henry stood, bowed his head slightly, and thanked everyone. Then he sat back down for a moment, letting the moment sink in. When the guests had gone and the chairs were being stacked, Ethan and Henry sat at a corner table sipping tea. You know, Ethan said, I've been thinking about what you said earlier, about music finding broken hearts. Henry looked at him. Yes, Ethan sighed. I think I've been broken for a long time and didn't even notice. I've got more money than I could ever need, but most nights I go home and feel nothing. Henry nodded quietly. That's the hardest kind of emptiness, the kind that can't be filled with things. Ethan looked thoughtful. When I was a kid, I used to draw. I loved it. But when I grew up, I stopped. My father told me dreams don't pay bills, so I focused on work. I guess somewhere along the way I forgot how to feel joy. Henry smiled softly. Then maybe it's time you started drawing again. Ethan laughed quietly, shaking his head. At my age? Age has nothing to do with it, Henry replied. You think these fingers play because I'm young? No, they play because I still love what I do. You just have to love something enough to start again. Ethan stared at him, realizing that those simple words carried more truth than anything he'd heard in years. Maybe you're right, he said quietly. Henry leaned forward, smiling. Music, art, kindness, those are the things that make life worth living. Don't ever let the world convince you they're small. Ethan nodded slowly. He didn't say much after that, but the words stayed with him long after he left the restaurant. Over the next few weeks, Henry's performances became a regular feature. People from across the city came to hear him play. Some came every night, saying it helped them forget their troubles. The restaurant flourished, but Ethan knew it wasn't just the food or service, it was Henry's music. Ethan started visiting daily, sometimes staying late just to talk. They spoke about life, loss, and dreams. Henry told stories of his students and how music had shaped their lives. Ethan shared memories of his childhood, of drawing pictures he never showed anyone. Slowly, a friendship formed, unlikely, but genuine. One quiet evening after the last song, Ethan sat beside Henry at the piano. You know, he said, you've done more for this place than I ever could. Henry smiled faintly. I've just been playing. Ethan shook his head. No, Henry, you've reminded people what it means to feel. You've reminded me what it means to live. Henry looked at him kindly. That's the power of music, my friend. It speaks when words can't. They sat in silence for a while, listening to the faint hum of the city outside. Then Henry looked at the keys and said softly, I'm glad I met you, Ethan. I didn't think anyone would ever listen again. Ethan smiled. I'm glad I looked out that window that night. Henry chuckled. Funny how life works, isn't it? One small act can change everything. Ethan nodded slowly. Yes, and I think this is just the beginning. As Henry played one last tune before leaving, Ethan watched quietly. The music was soft, filled with gratitude and peace. It was as if Henry was saying thank you not just to Ethan, but to life itself. When the final note faded, Ethan clapped softly, then said, You know, Henry, I think your story deserves to be told. Henry smiled, his eyes gentle. Then you tell it, Ethan, you have the voice for it. Ethan laughed. Maybe I will. Outside, the city lights shimmered like stars on the wet streets. Inside, the echo of Henry's piano lingered long after he had gone, wrapping the restaurant in quiet magic. That night, Ethan didn't go home right away. He stayed sitting by the piano, tracing his fingers over the keys. For the first time in many years, he felt something real. He smiled, thinking about the old man who played for food and ended up feeding the souls of everyone who heard him. And deep down, he knew this story wasn't over yet. Months passed, and the little restaurant by the corner became more than a place to eat. It became a place to feel. People came not just for the food, but for the music, the peace, and the sense of connection they couldn't find anywhere else. And at the heart of it all was the old man at the piano. Henry's presence had changed everything. The restaurant now opened each evening with soft piano music, and regular guests had started calling it the Melody Spot. It wasn't an official name, but everyone knew what they meant when they said, Let's go listen to the piano man tonight. Ethan watched it all with quiet pride. He had built many things in his life, companies, homes, wealth, but this small place with its warm light and gentle music, felt like the first thing that truly mattered. One cold evening, when the first snow of winter began to fall outside, Henry arrived early. He carried a small old-looking case. Ethan noticed it immediately. "What's that?" he asked with curiosity. Henry smiled. "My wife's music book. I found it in an old box last week. She used to write down melodies she loved and sometimes her own songs. I thought maybe tonight I could play one for her." Ethan's voice softened. "I'd be honored to hear it." That night, as people filled the restaurant, Henry sat at the piano with the book open in front of him. He ran his fingers gently over the faded pages as if greeting an old friend. Then he began to play. The tune was different from his usual pieces. It was slow, delicate, filled with quiet emotion. Every note felt like a whisper, like a memory shared with the world. The crowd was silent, not because they were told to be, but because they couldn't do anything else but listen. Ethan stood near the window, watching the snow fall as the song filled the room. He felt tears in his eyes but didn't hide them. The music carried something sacred, something beyond words. When the final note faded, the room remained quiet for a few seconds before gentle applause filled the air. Henry looked up, smiling softly. "That was her favorite," he said quietly. "I think she would have liked that people heard it tonight." Ethan nodded, his voice low. She would have been proud. Over the next few weeks, Henry's music grew even more special. He began playing new songs from the book, saying he wanted to finish what his wife had started. The audience loved it. Some even asked for copies of the songs so they could learn them themselves. Ethan, meanwhile, found himself changing in ways he didn't expect. He began sketching again quietly late at night. Sometimes, after everyone left, he'd sit by the piano with a pencil and paper, drawing Henry's hands as they moved over the keys. He didn't tell anyone. It was just something he needed to do. One evening after closing time, he showed Henry one of the sketches. Henry looked at it for a long moment and smiled. "You caught it perfectly," he said softly. "The way the music feels in the hands." Ethan looked embarrassed. "It's not much, I just felt something when you played." Henry put a hand on his shoulder. "Then it's everything. That's all art is. Feeling made visible." They sat there for a long time, not saying much, just letting the silence fill the space between them. As winter deepened, Henry began to tire more easily. He never complained, but Ethan noticed it. His hands shook a little more, his breath came slower. Still, he never missed a night. One evening, when the snow was heavy outside, Henry arrived later than usual. He looked pale, but when Ethan asked if he was all right, he smiled. "Just a little cold, that's all. The piano will warm me up." Ethan didn't push him. He knew Henry's pride, his devotion to music ran deep. That night, the crowd was large. People had come from far away, having heard stories about the lonely grandpa who played like an angel. Henry sat down, cracked his fingers lightly, and began. The music was beautiful, more than ever. It was filled with a strange brightness, as if he knew something the rest of them didn't. Each note carried both joy and goodbye, woven together in the most tender way. Ethan felt a lump in his throat again. Something about the song made him uneasy. It felt final. When the last note ended, the room was silent. Then slowly everyone stood and applauded. Henry smiled, bowed slightly, and said softly, "Thank you for listening." That night, after everyone had left, Henry stayed behind. He looked tired, so Ethan helped him to a chair. "You should rest," Ethan said gently. Henry nodded. "I will. I just wanted to stay here a little longer." Ethan poured him some tea, and they sat together in the quiet room, the lights low, snow still falling outside. After a while, Henry spoke. "You know, Ethan, when I first sat on that street corner and asked to play for food, I didn't think anyone would ever listen again. I thought the world had forgotten me." Ethan looked at him, his chest tight. "I'm glad I did." Henry smiled faintly. "You did more than listen. You gave me my music back." Ethan's eyes grew wet, but he said nothing. Henry looked toward the piano. "Promise me one thing," he said softly. "Anything," Ethan replied. "When I'm gone, keep the piano here. Keep the music alive. Let others play. Let them feel what I felt." Ethan swallowed hard. "You're not going anywhere." Henry smiled gently. "We all go somewhere eventually. But music, it stays." The next morning, Henry didn't show up. Ethan called his number, but there was no answer. Something inside him told him what had happened, but he drove to Henry's small apartment anyway. When he got there, he found the place quiet, warm, and peaceful. On the table was the old music book, open to the last song Henry had played. A note lay beside it, written in shaky handwriting. "Thank you for listening." Ethan sat there for a long time, tears falling freely, holding the book to his chest. Days later, the restaurant was packed again, but this time there was no piano sound. Instead, a candle burned on top of the piano, and Henry's music book sat open beside it. People came not to eat but to pay their respects, to remember the man who had reminded them how to feel. Ethan stood at the front, addressing the crowd quietly. "He played for food once," he said softly, "but in the end he fed us something far greater. He fed our hearts." The room was silent, save for the soft hum of the city outside. Then slowly a young boy stepped forward. He couldn't have been older than 12. He looked shy but determined. "Can I play something?" he asked. Ethan nodded, his eyes kind. "Of course." "The piano is yours." The boy sat down, his small hands trembling. He pressed the first key, Mar, and the sound filled the room once again. It wasn't perfect, but it was beautiful in its own way. Ethan closed his eyes and smiled. Somewhere, he felt, Henry was listening. From that day forward, the restaurant kept the piano in its place, untouched except by those who truly loved to play. Ethan began hosting open music nights where anyone, rich or poor, young or old, could come and share their songs. It became a place of connection, laughter, and healing. Every so often, Ethan would sit at the piano himself. He wasn't a great player, but he tried. He'd open the music book, play a few simple notes, and whisper quietly, "This one's for you, my friend." Years passed. The restaurant grew famous, not for its luxury, but for its warmth. People said you could feel something special there, something you couldn't find anywhere else. One evening, long after the rush had gone and the lights had dimmed, Ethan sat alone by the piano. He opened his old sketchbook, now filled with drawings of Henry, his hands, his smile, the way he leaned over the keys. He smiled softly, knowing the man's spirit still lived in every note. Outside, snow began to fall again, just like that first night. Ethan looked out the window, hearing faint music in his mind, Henry's music, and whispered, "Thank you for everything." And for a moment, he could almost swear he heard a piano reply, soft and distant, playing that same tune that started it all, the song of a lonely grandpa who only wanted to play for food, but ended up giving the world something far more precious.